Ukraine's legitimacy as a state and presenting its very existence as a mortal threat to Russia, Putin is establishing the pretext for a full-scale offensive. I think honourable members will struggle to understand or to contemplate how in the year 2022 a national leader might calmly and deliberately plot the destruction of a peaceful neighbour. And yet the evidence of his own words suggests that is exactly what President Putin is doing. When I said on Saturday that his scheme to subvert and invade Ukraine was already in motion before our eyes, the events of the last 24 hours have, sadly, shown this to be true. We must now brace ourselves for the next possible stages of Putin's plan. The violent subversion of areas of eastern Ukraine by Russian operatives and their hirelings, followed by a general offensive by the nearly 200,000 Russian troops gathered on the frontiers at peak readiness to attack. If the worst happens, then a European nation of 44 million men, women and children would become the target of a full-scale war of aggression, waged without a shred of justification for the absurd and even mystical reasons that Putin described last night. Unless the situation changes, the best efforts of the United States, of this country, France, Germany and other allies to avoid conflict through patient diplomacy may be in vain. From the beginning, we have tried our utmost, we've all tried, to find a peaceful way through this crisis. On the 11th of February, my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary and the Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral Radakin, paid the first joint visit to Moscow by the holders of their offices since Churchill, who was also Defence Minister at the time, travelled to Russia with General Allenbrook in 1944. They held over 3 hours of frank discussions with the Russian Defence Minister, General Shoigu, and the Chief of Staff, General Gerasimov, demonstrating how seriously we take Russia's security concerns, how much we respect her history, and how hard we are prepared to work to ensure peaceful coexistence. My right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, delivered the same messages when she met our Russian counterpart in Moscow on the 10th of February. I've spoken on a number of occasions to President Putin since this crisis began, so has President Biden, while President Macron and Chancellor Scholz have both visited Moscow. Together, we have explored every avenue and given Putin every opportunity to pursue his aims by negotiation and diplomacy. And I will tell the House, we will not give up. We will continue to seek a diplomatic solution until the last possible moment. But we have to face the possibility that none of our messages has been heeded and that Putin is implacably determined to go further in subjugating and tormenting Ukraine. And it is because we suspected as much that the UK and our allies repeatedly sounded the alarm about a possible new invasion, and we disclosed much of what we knew about Russia's military build-up. Britain has done everything possible to help Ukraine to prepare for another onslaught, training 22,000 soldiers, supplying 2,000 anti-tank missiles, and providing £100 million for economic reform and energy independence. We will now guarantee up to $500 million of development bank financing. I travelled to Kiev to meet President Zelensky on the 1st of February. I saw him again in Munich the weekend. I spoke to him again last night, soon after President Putin's speech, to assure him, as I'm sure the whole House would agree was the right thing to do. I assured him of Britain's unwavering support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And now the UK and our allies will begin to impose the sanctions on Russia that we have already prepared, using the new and unprecedented powers granted by this House to sanction Russian individuals and entities of strategic importance to the Kremlin. Today, the UK is sanctioning the following 5 Russian banks: Rossiya, IS Bank, General Bank, Promziaz Bank and the Black Sea Bank. And we are sanctioning 3 very high net worth individuals, Gennady Timchenko, Boris Rottenberg and Igor Rottenberg. Any assets they hold in the UK will be frozen. The individuals concerned will be banned from travelling here. And we will prohibit all UK individuals and entities from having any dealings with them. This is the first tranche, the first barrage of what we are prepared to do. And we hold further sanctions at readiness to be deployed alongside the United States and the European Union if the situation escalates still further. Last night, our diplomats joined an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, and we will raise the situation in the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. And let me emphasise what I believe unites every member of this House with equal determination: the resolve of the United Kingdom to defend our NATO allies is absolute and immovable. We've already doubled the size of our deployment in Estonia, where the British Army leads NATO's battle group, and when I met President Levits of Latvia and Prime Minister Kallas of Estonia in Munich on Saturday, I told them that we would be willing to send more British forces to help protect our allies if NATO makes such a request. We cannot tell what will happen in the days ahead, but, Mr. Speaker, we should steel ourselves for a protracted crisis. The United Kingdom will meet this challenge side by side with our allies, determined that we will not allow Putin to drag our continent back into a Hobbesian state of nature where aggression pays and might is right. And it is precisely because the stakes are so high that Putin's venture in Ukraine must fail, must ultimately fail, and must be seen to fail. That will require the perseverance and the unity and the resolve of the entire Western alliance, and Britain, the UK, will do everything possible to ensure that that unity is maintained. And now our thoughts should turn to our valiant Ukrainian friends, who threaten no one, who ask for nothing except to live in peace and freedom. We will keep faith with them in the critical days that lie ahead. And whatever happens, Mr. Speaker, Britain will not waver in our resolve. And I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday was a dark day for Europe. The Russian president denied the right of a sovereign nation to exist, unilaterally recognising separatist movements that he sponsors and who seek to dismember Ukraine. And then, under the cover of darkness, sent in troops to enforce his will. Putin appears determined to plunge Ukraine into a wider war. We must all stand firm in our support for Ukraine. We support the freedom of her people and their right to determine their own future without the gun of an imperialist held to their head. There can be no excuses for Russia's actions. There is no justification for this aggression. A war in Ukraine will be bloody, it will cost lives, and history will rightly scorn Putin as the aggressor. Putin claims to fear NATO expansion, but Russia faces no conceivable threat from Allied troops or from Ukraine. What he fears is openness and democracy. He knows that given a choice, people will not choose to live under the rule of an erratic and violent authoritarian. So we must remain united and true to our values across this House and with our NATO allies. We must show Putin that we will not be divided. I welcome the sanctions introduced today, and the international community's efforts to unite with a collective response. However, we must be prepared to go further. I understand the tactic of holding back sanctions on Putin and his cronies to try to deter an invasion of the rest of Ukraine. But a threshold has already been breached. A sovereign nation has been invaded in a war of aggression based on lies and fabrication. If we do not respond with a full set of sanctions now, Putin will once again take away the message that the benefits of aggression outweigh the costs. So we will work with the Prime Minister and our international allies to ensure that more sanctions are introduced. Russia should be excluded from financial mechanisms like SWIFT, and we should ban trading in Russian sovereign debt. Putin's campaign of misinformation should be tackled. Russia today should be prevented from broadcasting its propaganda around the world. And we should work with our European allies to ensure that Nord Stream 2 pipeline is cancelled. Whatever the sequencing of these sanctions, this won't be easy. Britain must work with our European allies to handle the disruption in the supply of energy and raw materials. We must defend ourselves and our allies against cyber attacks. We must bring together the widest possible coalition of nations to condemn this action against a sovereign UN member state. Ukrainians are defending their own country and democracy in Europe. We must stand ready with more military support for Ukraine to defend itself. And we must stand ready to do more to reassure and reinforce NATO allies in Eastern Europe. But we must also get our own house in order. The Prime Minister said the lesson from Russia's 2014 invasion of Donbass is that you can't just let Vladimir Putin get away with it. But until now we have. We have failed to stop the flow of illicit Russian finance into Britain. A cottage industry does the bidding of those linked to Putin, and Russian money has been allowed to influence our politics. We have to admit that mistakes have been made. We have to rectify them. This must be a turning point, an end to oligarch impunity. We need to draw a line on Companies House, providing easy cover for shell companies. We need to ensure our anti-money laundering laws are enforced. We need to crack down on spies, and we have to make sure money isn't pouring into UK politics from abroad. Russian aggression has now torn up the Minsk Protocol and the Budapest Memorial. But even at this late hour, we must pursue diplomatic routes to prevent further conflict. So can the Prime Minister tell us what international diplomatic efforts are going on and what role the UK will have in that process? Mr. Speaker, we know Putin's playbook. He seeks division. We must stay united. He believes the benefits of aggression outweigh the consequences, so we must take a stand. And he believes the West is too corrupted to do the right thing, so we must prove him wrong. I believe we can, and I offer the support of the opposition in that vital endeavour. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, for the clarity with which he has just spoken and the support that he has given to the UK's strategy in dealing with this crisis in Europe. And I think, if I may say so, that that will be noted, and the change in the approach taken by the opposition is I think, massively, over the last couple of years, Mr. Speaker, is massively beneficial. The change over the last couple of years, Mr. Speaker, which I think that a fair-minded person would acknowledge. And he's raised some important questions, and they relate to the ways in which we clamp down on Russian money in the UK and indeed throughout the West. And this country was the first to publish a register of beneficial ownership. This country has led the way in cracking down on wealth that is unexplained, and we are bringing forward an economic crime bill to take forward further measures, Mr. Speaker. And I think the House should understand it is absolutely vital that we hold in reserve further powerful sanctions, as I think the Right Honourable Gentleman acknowledged, in view of what President Putin may do next. And we want to stop Russian companies from being able to raise funds in sterling or indeed in dollars, Mr. Speaker. We want to stop them raising funds on UK markets, and we want to strip away the veil that conceals the ownership of property in this country and indeed throughout the West. And we will work with our friends and partners around the world to achieve that. And the sanctions we're implementing today are very tough. Promziaz Bank is a top 10 Russian bank, and it services 70% of state contracts signed by the Russian Ministry of Defence. But the measures that we have prepared are much, much tougher still, and we will have absolutely no hesitation in implementing them. Mr. Speaker, we will get on with the business of diplomacy, and he's absolutely right to draw attention to the importance of diplomacy now, in spite of everything that is happening on the borders of Ukraine and now in Donbass. There is a G7 meeting straight after this statement, Mr. Speaker. We will be holding meetings in NATO, in the P5, and in every forum where it is relevant and possible to bring President Putin to understand the gravity of what he is doing. The UK will continue to offer support to our Ukrainian friends, and I do think it has been right for us to be out in front in offering military assistance, defensive military assistance to the Ukrainians. I think that has been the right thing to do. I spoke last night to President Zelensky, who made further requests, and we will consider them. We're doing everything we can to offer support in the time that we have, and we will do that. But I just think it is worth, and I'm glad that the Right Honourable Gentleman seemed to support that as well. It is absolutely vital at this critical moment that President Putin understands that what he is doing is going to be a disaster for Russia. And it is clear from the response of the world to what he has done already in Donbass that he is going to end up with a Russia that is poorer as a result of the sanctions that the world will implement. A Russia that is more isolated, a Russia that has pariah status, Mr. Speaker. No chance of holding football tournaments in a Russia that invades sovereign countries, Mr. Speaker. And a Russia that is engaged in a bloody and debilitating conflict with a fellow Slav country. What an appalling result for President Putin, Mr. Speaker. I hope that he steps back from the brink and does not conduct a full invasion. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we must implement the tough package that we put forward, and we will continue to offer the Ukrainian people all the support that we can.
Theresa May.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and also welcome the UK's unwavering support for Ukrainian sovereignty at this gravest of times, which shows we can never take our eyes off Russia. But does my right honourable friend share my concern that while the focus today is rightly on protecting Ukrainian independence and territorial integrity, what lies behind this is a wider worldwide trend of authoritarian states trying to impose their way of thinking on others, and that the battle in which we must now engage is nothing more nor less than the defence of democracy itself.
My right honourable friend is entirely right, and that is what is at stake. And what happens in Ukraine, what is happening in Ukraine now, is being watched around the world, and the echoes will be heard in Taiwan, in East Asia, and throughout the world.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement, and to the National Security Advisor who has briefed opposition leaders. Mr. Speaker, this is a dark day for the people of Ukraine and for people right across our European continent. Europe stands on the brink of war as a consequence of Russian aggression. It is a day that communities across Scotland, right across these islands and indeed across Europe, desperately hoped would never come to pass. But although that sense of darkness defines today, how we now collectively respond will define the days to come. This chamber, especially during recent months, has seen fierce debate and disagreements. But today, I think it's important to say, in the face of Russian aggression against Ukraine, that in this House, that we all stand together. Yeah. Stand together and stand with our partners across Europe and indeed across the globe. But more importantly, Mr. Speaker, we stand with the Ukrainian people who are now under assault. A European country, an ally, is under attack. We should be very clear about what is now happening. This is an illegal Russian occupation of Ukraine, just as it was in Crimea. Russia has effectively annexed another 2 Ukrainian regions in a blatant breach of international law. This effectively ends the Minsk process. It is a further violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. No one should even repeat the Russian lie that this is about peacekeeping. Mr. Speaker, this is warmongering, plain and simple. President Putin must hear the call from here and elsewhere to draw back before any further escalation can take place. Mr. Speaker, I and my party welcome the sanctions that are now being brought forward, but it's deeply regrettable that the delay has allowed many Russian individuals to shift dirty assets and money in the last number of weeks. But can I ask the Prime Minister specifically if the Russian state and individuals will immediately be suspended from the SWIFT payment system? And just as economic sanctions against Russia are welcome, Ukraine needs immediate economic and indeed humanitarian support if required. When will economic and humanitarian support be enacted and what will it entail? Can the Prime Minister also confirm that there will be exemptions for partners of UK citizens residing in the Ukraine to come to the United Kingdom? They need that certainty and they need it today. In the days ahead, we can no doubt expect a barrage of disinformation from the Russian media and its proxies. So, can the Prime Minister update on how the United Kingdom government intends to combat that threat? This is also the moment to end the complacency in implementing the Security Committee's Russia report. Will the Prime Minister now commit to its full implementation and update the House accordingly? Can I also ask the Prime Minister that after the UN Security Council meeting last night, the brief meeting, when it will next meet, and what coordination is happening across all international organisations to force President Putin to step back from the brink before it is too late? Finally, let President Putin hear loudly and clearly that he must now desist from this act of war, this attack on a sovereign nation. Let us all demonstrate that we stand with the people of Ukraine.
Mr. Speaker, can I wholeheartedly thank the right honourable gentleman for the terms in which he has just spoken, the unity and the resolve that he has just shown in common with the right honourable gentleman, the leader of the opposition. I think the spirit that this House is showing today is absolutely invaluable, and he's right to raise questions about the speed in which we've been able to sanction various individuals. We did bring forward the Magnitsky sanctions, as he knows, and he was important in that last year. We are bringing forward the registry of beneficial ownership faster than any other country, stripping away the veil on Russian dirty money. He asked about support for Ukraine. As I mentioned to the House, we've given £100 million worth of support, particularly for Ukraine's energy crisis and also for other economic needs, plus the further $500 million that I announced just now. And Mr. Speaker, the diplomatic effort is now intensifying. He asked about the forums in which they're taking place. There are more meetings in the UN, but ultimately, as he rightly says, this is up to Vladimir Putin. He and he alone can decide whether or not to halt what seems to be an absolutely irresistible march towards tragedy. It's down to him. It's in his head.
Can I just say, I'm expecting to run this to around 2 o'clock, so 12 each other. Short questions and certainly pithy answers would certainly be helpful. Tom Tugendar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I welcome my right honourable friend's statement today, and indeed the actions of he and his government over these recent weeks. May I pay particular tribute to the Defence Secretary, whose unfailing efforts in preparing not just the people of Ukraine but our allies in NATO for this aggression has been exemplary. May I ask, as we are talking about sanctions today, and rightly so, whether my right honourable friend will also commit to a Foreign Agents Registration Act. We have seen the action of the insidious work of the United Front for China and indeed of different outfits for Russia to undermine our democracy and threaten our way of life. Would he please bring in that act? And while he is doing it, would he finance much more the Russian service of the BBC so that the Russian people can hear the truth and not the lies that are being spread by their own government?
I thank you very much. I think the Russian service of the BBC has done an invaluable job, and I think it's very, very important that it should continue to be financed. I will look at the details of their package. On his proposal for a foreign agent registration law, we are indeed considering what more we can do to counter threats to this country from within.
Dame Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to expert legal advice I've seen, there are serious flaws in the new sanctions regime. Yeah. It may not affect oligarchs close to Putin who do not hold an official position in a company or own less than 50% of shares. It's too narrow in defining the individuals it covers. Unlike US legislation, it's limited in how we can sanction Russian government officials, and the definition of government of Russia excludes the legislative branch like the Duma. That means that kleptocrats who have stolen from the Russian people and support Putin would not be caught. Of Navalny's list of 35, only 13 would be caught. Abramovich, Usmanov, Timchenko or Deripaska would escape. Will the Prime Minister look again at the sanctions regime so that, in the words of the Foreign Secretary, nothing is off the table?
I thank her very much, and I think that I understand her concern, but I believe that she's in error in what she says, because we can certainly target members of the Duma. Abramovich is already facing sanctions, and in the announcements that I've made today, Gennady Timchenko, to whom she just referred, is specifically targeted. He's on the list. She's just mentioned him. He's on the list, as is Boris Rottenberg and Igor Rottenberg. And these are people who are very close to the Putin regime. But as I said to the House, they are just part of the first barrage.
Speaker, could I welcome the government's efforts to date, but Russia's actions move us into a new and more dangerous phase of this crisis and requires us to adapt a more robust long-term approach to defending European security outside of NATO's borders. Sanctions alone will not be enough. Indeed, untargeted sanctions may play into Putin's plan to pivot Russia ever closer to China. So would the Prime Minister agree NATO must not be benched? It was created to uphold European security, and we must now consider how we utilise our formidable hard power deterrence in responding to Ukraine's calls for further help, not excluding the formation of a potential no-fly zone.
I thank the right honourable gentleman very much, and he's absolutely right to place the emphasis that he does on NATO. And NATO has proved its value over the last 70 years. It is the preeminent, most successful alliance in history. It is a defensive alliance, and we are reinforcing it now on the eastern, all across the eastern perimeter. What NATO is not doing, and no NATO country is currently considering sending combat troops to Ukraine, and he will understand the reasons for that. But that does not preclude support by NATO countries for Ukraine, and including military support, Mr. Speaker.
David.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's time to start treating Russia like the rogue state it is, and I strongly welcome the Prime Minister's statement on this darkest of moments, and I recognise the Leader of the Opposition for his strong cross-party support. And in that cross-party spirit, can I urge the Prime Minister to go further today and commit to the following? First, freeze and begin seizing the assets of every single one of Putin's cronies in the UK, and then expel these oligarchs from our country as part of a much stronger sanctions regime. Second, Mr. Speaker, recognise the existential threat posed by Putin to our NATO allies by immediately cancelling his own decision, his misguided decision, to cut our armed forces by 10,000 troops. And third, no longer tolerate international sporting or cultural events hosted in Russia. So can I confirm what I think he implied in an answer to a previous question, that he will push for this year's Champions League final to be moved from St. Petersburg? Mr. Speaker, President Putin has made a terrible decision. Will the Prime Minister make sure he pays a terrible price?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to him and his party for their support and for the position that we're taking. And we are indeed cracking down on ill-gotten gains in London and on the cronies of Vladimir Putin, as I've just detailed, and there is more to come. On his point about defence spending, I think he should acknowledge that the recent increase was the biggest since the end of the Cold War. And, Mr. Speaker, on his point about sporting events, as I said earlier on, I think it inconceivable that major international football tournaments can take place in Russia after, as I say, the invasion of a sovereign country.
So, Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend accept that too many NATO governments and political parties have accepted energy dependence on Putin and financial dependence on dodgy donations from Russian oligarchs? Given that we spent between 4.5% and 5% of GDP on defence throughout the 1980s until the end of the Cold War, will he now accept 3% of GDP on defence as a suitable future benchmark?
The right honourable gentleman, you're completely right to say that we have failed to wean ourselves off dependence on Russian hydrocarbons since 2014. I think that's been a tragic mistake by European countries. In the UK, we're in the fortunate position of only having 3% of our gas coming from Russia, but other European countries have learned that they have much more to do. And by the way, I salute the decision of the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz to cancel Nord Stream 2. I think it's a brave step by Olaf and the right thing to do. On his point about defence spending, actually we're up at 2.4% now of GDP. I think one of the very highest in NATO, and we are the second biggest contributor, second biggest military power in NATO already.
Very Sherman.
Mr. Speaker, can I say to the Prime Minister that America is key in all this? It's the largest economy, it's the largest forces in NATO. We were honoured by having Nancy Pelosi in this chamber yesterday. She's very close to President of the United States. Did he have a chance to talk to her? Because it isn't good enough for us, cross-party, wonderful unity in this House, but we need the United States to be firm in leadership with us.
I thank him very much, and I did have a chance to talk to Nancy and Pelosi and her bipartisan delegation, and I must say, Mr. Speaker, that the sentiments that have been expressed by members of this House already today were very much shared by that delegation of congressmen and women.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and say that I think the UK government has behaved with integrity and honour throughout this crisis, and I echo his welcoming of Chancellor Scholz's brave decision today to freeze Nord Stream 2. But can I say to my right honourable friend, sanctions can only achieve so much when dealing with an undemocratic state and someone like Putin. What we're witnessing is the real-time cannibalisation of a European democratic state, bite by bite. And ultimately, we will have to ensure that either Ukraine is given the means to defend itself from future aggression or give some sort of security guarantee, or we will find Russian troops on the borders of Poland, Slovakia, Romania and Hungary, which would be an absolute failure of Western policy.
my right honourable friend has written and spoken powerfully about this subject recently, and he's completely right in the sense that we will have to bed in, we will have to dig in for the long term to support Ukraine in every way that we can, economically, diplomatically, by the provision of military support in the way that we are already, Mr. Speaker. But it will take time. But I think there is. Let me get back to the point I made in my opening statement. It is vital that President Putin should fail, and I believe that he will fail, because I believe that the giant facts are against him. He is taking on a Ukrainian national feeling, and in the end he will not succeed, and we will help the Ukrainians to succeed.
Sir Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that part of the calculation of the Kremlin and President Putin is that the West will lose interest in, as we have done, unfortunately, in the past. Can he make it one of his key tasks to ensure that our allies are there for the long run? Because we've got to be there until this is brought to a proper conclusion.
I thank him very much, and I think he's completely right. And the biggest threat is apathy and indifference, and that's why I think what my right honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, had to say was so important. This is not just about Ukraine. This is about democracy, and this is about the security of many other European countries, and indeed countries around the world. That's what's at stake here today.
Ian Duncan-Smith.
Speaker, can I commend my right honourable friend and his colleagues for their very stalwart actions so far. The fact is that Mr. Lavrov today said, and I quote, "Ukraine does not have a right to sovereignty." So the ambition and the scale of that ambition is surely completely clear to anybody that doubts it. So I ask my right honourable friend, should it not be now, and I commend what he's done so far, but should it not be that we need to hit them, if we're going to hit them with sanctions, hard, and hit them now? They need to feel the pain of the first part of this decision. The second thing is, what is the ultimatum to them now? If they move further, are we going to take further action? And I simply say right now, we are facing the growth of the axis of totalitarian states. China will watch this and look at Taiwan. How we behave now and what we do as an alliance will dictate what happens in the Far East.
Mr. Speaker, we are hitting them hard now, and we will hit them harder in the future. With every day that goes by in which they violate the sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine, we will continue to punish Russia. And in the end, I don't believe that President Putin has thought this through, and I do think that he will fail.
Chris Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Putin, as I've been saying for many years, is a bloodthirsty liar. When his ambassador came to the House a couple of weeks ago to talk to the all-party group on Russia, he said it was absolutely preposterous that anybody could possibly suggest that any Russian troops would be going into Ukraine. That was a lie then, not an inadvertent lie, a deliberate lie. But my anxiety is that we're not going anywhere near far enough today. In 2014, we were spineless in the end. We didn't show enough resolve across the West or in the UK. We didn't close down the dirty money process coming into the UK. I don't think Abramovich has been sanctioned, incidentally, just to correct the Prime Minister. I don't think he's been sanctioned yet at all. So I think it's really important, precisely what the former leader of the Conservative Party just said. Everybody in this House will work closely with the government to deliver far more effective and secure sanctions if the Prime Minister asks, but they have to be now. We have to close the dirty Russian money down.
Mr. Speaker, this government is already implementing a draconian package of sanctions, and we will go further. And we're bringing forward the economic crime bill, the register of beneficial interests. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to all the things that I've announced today, we will be bringing forward further measures to hit Russian individuals and Russian companies, as I said, of strategic importance to Russia, and stopping Russian companies from raising money on London markets, stopping them even trading in pounds and dollars. These will bite, these will hurt, and these will make a huge difference. But Mr. Speaker, I think the House also needs to understand that President Putin's failure will not just be caused by sanctions implemented by us and by our friends. His failure will result from the determination of the Ukrainians to resist, and in that we will support them.
I welcome these sanctions and the government's significant efforts to expose false flag operations. But ruble by ruble, we must rid our nation of Putin's dirty money because of his acts overnight and those lives already lost. I urge my right honourable friend to blacklist all Russian banks, but to ban the city and law and accountancy firms from servicing all Russian state firms, and to work with Turkey to deny the Russian Navy access to the Bosphorus and ensure we have an atrocity prevention strategy in place for when the paramilitaries go in alongside the peacekeepers.
I thank her very much, and that is exactly why the UK has been out in front of our European friends in dealing with Russian dirty money and in implementing the toughest possible package of sanctions. And I told the House we will go further.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. These are perilous times for our friends in Ukraine, a democracy within our continent. And short of sending British troops there, we must provide them with every possible support. I'm glad that the Prime Minister is talking tough and taking a strong stand against continued Russian aggression and imperialism. But when will he himself stop playing tennis with Russian oligarchs in exchange for money for the Conservative Party? And instead of talking about sanctions abroad, when will he finally help to clean up things closer to home, including fully implementing the recommendations of the Russia report?
Mr. Speaker, the government, as I said, is way out in front of our other European friends and partners in what we're doing to implement sanctions on Russian entities, and that's the right thing. I think that's where the House is today, and we will continue to do that. And yes, Mr. Speaker, it is absolutely vital that nobody should contribute to a political party in this country unless they're a UK national, and that is what that is something that this government that's what this government insists upon. But what I don't think we should see, Mr. Speaker, if I may just respectfully say, and I've just been listening to some of the contributions this morning, we should not allow our indignation, our rage at what is happening in Ukraine to spill over into casual Russophobia. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to see us discriminating against Russians as a people or simply on the basis of their nationality.
William Cash.
Mr. Speaker, may I commend my right honourable friend for his prescience and resolve on Ukraine, and also that of the Defence Secretary. Can he confirm that escalating economic sanctions against Russia and fully effective defensive support for Ukraine can never be allowed to fail, given that Russia and President Putin's aggression affects all its European neighbours and has an ever-increasing global reach, including even in places like Africa?
The right honourable gentleman, my right honourable friend, is completely right. The threat is not just to Europe. The threat from an aggressive and expansionist Russian agenda is everywhere, including in Africa from the Wagner Group, Mr. Speaker, and it is up to the UK now to push back, and that's what we're going to do.
Dame Angela Reid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister tell the House now whether the sanctions that he has announced will actually put into effect the Intelligence and Securities Committee's Russia report, and whether he has full confidence that this will close down the so-called London laundromat, which is laundering dirty Russian money straight through the city.
As she will have understood from what I've said earlier on, what we're proposing to do will go further than that report. We're cracking down today on Russian banks, on Russian individuals. But what we are proposing to do is to stop Russian companies even from raising money in London and to stop them trading in sterling. That was not recommended by the report she mentions, but that will do real economic damage where it is necessary to do it.
Johnny Mercer.
Very much, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the Prime Minister's statement today and sanctions against Russia. But would he agree with me that we can't continue to consistently relearn the lessons of the past when it comes to drawing a line and being willing to hold that line militarily, if so? And whilst he has increased defence spending beyond what it has been for many years, and I congratulate him for that, the argument has always been that that must be tailored to meet the threat. And as the German Chancellor has mentioned this morning, that threat is changing. And will he commit to keep an eye on that defence spending to make sure that if we are asked, we can hold a line and we can lead NATO in the way that I know he wants to?
I thank him very much, and he's absolutely right to draw attention to defence spending, and it's great that the German Chancellor also now sees the importance of this. For a long time, he and I'm sure, have been campaigning for Germany to shoulder more of the defence burden, of the cost of defence in Europe, and that's a good thing. We've seen massive increases in our defence spending, but we want to make sure that it is targeted on things like tackling cyber, disinformation, all the modern forms of warfare in which Putin also specialises.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the sanctions announced today on the 5 banks and the 3 named individuals? However, the Prime Minister will be well aware there are many, many oligarchs who would, at face value, have huge wealth and huge assets in their own names, but that wealth and those assets are absolutely in the gift of the Russian state and at the beck and call of the Russian state. So can I confirm that the sanctions we will be discussing and agreeing later today do intend to make sure those trusted custodians of Russian state money are able to be sanctioned in the way the 3 individuals named today are being?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we will be able to sanction oligarchs, associates of President Putin, and companies of strategic importance to the Kremlin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I really welcome the Prime Minister's statement today, and in particular the level of cross-house agreement that there is, that we must stand up to Russian aggression. I also welcome Chancellor Scholz deciding to suspend Nord Stream 2. It always was an incredibly risky project, allowing great exposure to Russian gas. So can my right honourable friend assure the House that he is already considering what more can be done to protect our allies and friends in Eastern Europe from the inevitable consequences of the risky position we find ourselves in the dead of winter, with so much dependence on Russian gas?
I thank her very much, and I think the answer is that we need to work together to wean ourselves off to end the dependency on Russian gas. The House knows that all the things we're doing to support our Eastern European allies militarily, but we also need to share technology, particularly in renewables, to allow them to find a different future.
Ben.
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, whether the sanctions that the Prime Minister has just announced will hit Russia hard, as he said this morning, only time will tell. But the Prime Minister also said something else. He said there is a lot more that we're going to do in the event of an invasion. Now, the Prime Minister has just told the House that he regards what happened overnight as a renewed invasion of Ukraine. And if that is the government's view, then why is he waiting before imposing full sanctions on Russia now?
A couple of points, Mr. Speaker. The House will have heard me on this several times, and I've been very clear that what we wanted to do was to have the biggest possible package of sanctions ready to go in the event of a Russian towcat crossing into more sovereign Ukrainian territory. But what we will also do is make sure that the waves of sanctions that we implement are done in concert with our allies, and that's what we're doing.
Mr. Speaker, can I ask my right honourable friend to reflect, while thanking him for his statement, that President Putin has already achieved so much of what he set out to achieve, and that he may have no intention of launching a full-scale invasion of the Ukraine, but he has already committed the crimes that deserve the most severest punishment from the free world. And what are we going to do to continue to strengthen NATO, to unify NATO, which is exactly, of course, what he didn't want his policy to achieve.
My own friend is completely right. What he's succeeded in doing is greatly to unify NATO and to produce a much bigger commitment, not just by the UK, but by other major European powers to the reinforcement of NATO's eastern frontier. The French are doubling down in Romania, we're doubling down in Estonia. He's going to get much more NATO, not less.
Sir George Howarth.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For over a decade, Russia have been mounting cyber attacks on our critical national infrastructure and commercial interests. For over a decade, and there were no consequences. For over a decade, Russia has been swirling dirty money around the City of London, and there were no consequences. In order for Vladimir Putin to understand that he has now gone too far, he needs to be certain that if sanctions and diplomatic means don't succeed, then there will be consequences. Can the Right Honourable Gentleman agree with me that those consequences need to be still on the table, and Vladimir Putin needs to understand that they will be used?
The Right Honourable Gentleman is completely right that we need to make it absolutely clear to Russia that as a result of this venture, this ill-conceived and disastrous venture in Ukraine, his country will end up, as I said, poorer, more encircled by NATO, and engaged in a disastrous conflict with fellow Slavs, and a pariah state. That is what President Putin is willing on his people. A pariah state. That's what they'll become.
David Boris.
Mr. Speaker, there's more at stake here than just sanctions. We have various international protocols that have been drafted over literally decades, going back to the last war. Where does this incursion into the Ukraine actually leave us with these protocols, and how can we enforce any further measures against any breaches of these protocols?
I thank him. He's completely right, because this tears up the 1994 Budapest memorandum. It makes an absolute nonsense of the whole Minsk process, the agreement of 2014. That's ripped up too. International law has been mocked by what President Putin has done, and that is what is at stake. It is democracy and the rule of law across the world.
Savile Roberts.
Putin last night confirmed that he is a ruthless imperialist poised to destroy Ukraine's sovereignty and self-determination. And I too am grateful for the briefing from the National Security Advisor. We must now hit Putin where it hurts. As of this morning, BP's website proudly proclaims that it is one of the biggest foreign investors in Russia, owning nearly 20% of Russia's oil giant, Rosneft. Rosneft also has a secondary holding in London. Will the Prime Minister commit to imposing legally mandated divestment by UK firms in Russia? And if not now, when?
Mr. Speaker, I think we do have to recognise that the lesson of 2014 is that we have to move away from dependence on Russian hydrocarbons, and the government will be pursuing policies to that end.
Richard Drax.
Speaker, can I congratulate my right honourable friend and the Defence Secretary for the brilliant work they've done in this very, very difficult time. Mr. Putin is a bully, and bullies only stand up or recognise one thing, that is military force. If we are to fight for the freedom that we claim to hold so dear, we've got to pay to defend it. Will my right honourable friend go back to the EU and NATO in particular and say we've got to raise our spending budgets to at least 3%, have more planes, more ships, more men to deter, not wage war, to deter and prevent one from happening?
I thank him very much. He's completely right, and I can tell him that the British government is continually exhorting our European friends to exceed the 2% threshold. It'd be a great thing if we could get some of them up to 2%, never mind 3%, Mr. Speaker.
Jones.
I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today and welcome the sanctions against the 3 individuals that he's named. But the regulations which you referred to, which will be discussed later on today, will only be effective if there's a political will to actually implement them. Under Part 4 of the regulations, it defines the individual as an individual involved in obtaining benefit from or supporting the government of Russia. The Right Honourable Member for Dundee East raised the issue around, and it's a fact, that oligarchs are operating in this country with property, are supporting the Russian government both financially and politically. So will we bring sanctions against those individuals? He named Abramovich is just one of many.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, what we will be doing is targeting any individual or company of strategic importance to Russia.
Sir Robert Battler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I warmly welcome my Right Honourable friend's statement, and I commend the West for seeing through the Orwellian doublespeak of Putin and his cronies. I agree with my Right Honourable friend with regard to a staged approach to sanctions, but now that we have an incursion into Donetsk and Luhansk, is not the next stage to demand an immediate withdrawal by Russia from those regions, and if not, further sanctions must follow as a direct consequence?
Yes, of course, my Honourable friend is completely right that there should be an immediate withdrawal by Russia, and I wish I could be confident that that will happen. Well, I'm afraid all the omens are pointing in the opposite direction, and I think that the House will need to consider a much bigger package of sanctions and further measures of all kinds.
I'll deal with it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Polish government has said that it must be prepared to accept up to 1 million refugees displaced by conflict or fleeing for fear of persecution. Yet last week, when asked about accepting Ukrainian refugees, our Foreign Secretary said, and I quote, "We can't make any commitments about any refugees at this stage." Amid conflict, we must always put direct support for people first. So will the government today commit to accepting all Ukrainian refugees who wish to come to the UK, and also those persecuted in Russia for their resistance to war and Putin's regime?
I thank her very much. What we're doing is helping the countries that are directly vulnerable to an exodus of refugees from Ukraine. We put another 1,000 troops on standby, and this country will continue to do what it has always done and receive those who are fleeing in fear of persecution. That's what we will do.
Very bad.
I strongly support the robust approach taken by my Right Honourable friend, which indeed he took as Foreign Secretary. But Putin will have predicted and discounted Western sanctions long ago. So does he agree that if we are not to be behind in the diplomatic chess game, we need to do some things that he is not expecting? Firstly, a sustained increase in Western defence capability and spend. And secondly, a sustained reduction in the ability of the Russian state to finance its own armed forces with economic and financial sanctions that don't last just until the next government decides to have a reset, but if necessary for as long as this dangerous man remains president of Russia.
We've seen a 10% increase in defence spending in this country, and we will sustain that increase in defence spending. And he's absolutely right about the financing of Putin's armed forces. And the tragedy is that they've been financed from the proceeds of the sale of Russian oil and gas to Western European nations. And that is what has got to end.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is vital to stand in solidarity with Ukraine in the face of outrageous Russian aggression, with robust, far-reaching sanctions and by closing down London's money laundering machine now. Frankly, sanctions on 5 banks and 3 oligarchs doesn't go anywhere near enough. But with that, we must also recognise the extent of Russian meddling in our own politics. So will the Prime Minister stop studiously ignoring the Russia report from the Intelligence and Security Committee, which found credible evidence of attempts to interfere with the UK's election processes? Will he finally commit to an independent and comprehensive investigation?
Mr. Speaker, we're going further than the Russia report in implementing sanctions against Russia, and of course we would do anything to root out any foreign influence in any UK election, but I'm not aware of any.
Speaker, and I welcome the statement made by the Prime Minister. Tough sanctions require tough compliance. In his statement, the Prime Minister mentioned that UK individuals and entities should not have any dealings with the banks and Russian individuals that he mentioned. Would he therefore give an assurance to this House that any UK individuals or institutions that do have dealings with these banks and individuals, for them there will be the severest of penalties?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker. Those who abet sanctioned people, help them to evade money laundering, anti-money laundering provisions, help them to conceal beneficial interests, will, of course, be breaking the law themselves.
Ben Bradshaw.
The three oligarchs he's sanctioned today have been sanctioned by the United States for 4 years. We need to do better than that, Prime Minister. So will he re-examine the operation of unexplained wealth orders, not a single one of which has been issued since he became Prime Minister? And will he publish the list of all of those Russians who've obtained fast-track visas for the residency he referred to earlier by giving cash to the UK Exchequer?
Mr. Speaker, the National Crime Agency is pursuing many investigations against people for unexplained wealth orders, but on his point about visas, we're stopping Tier 1 visas from Russia.
Mr. Speaker. Can I just press the Prime Minister a little on the answer he gave to the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central? I welcome his statement and its robust approach, and the fact that he's confirmed that what President Putin has done does amount to an invasion of Ukraine with the necessary measures that follow. But in answer to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Prime Minister seemed to suggest that if what Vladimir Putin's done was limited to these alleged breakaway republics, that was a line and he had to do something else to trigger further sanctions. Can I just ask the Prime Minister to confirm that what he's already done means that we will be following up with further and stronger measures, even if President Putin does no more?
I think it's inevitable, given what is happening in Ukraine and on the borders of Ukraine, that we will be coming forward with a much bigger package of sanctions, Mr. Speaker. What you have today is an opening barrage that we're doing in common with our friends and allies.
And Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's focus rightly will be on the here and now, but when he finds a moment to reflect both on the recent failures in Afghanistan, but also it being overwhelmingly clear that Russia was, is and will continue to be the greatest threat to peace and security in Europe, I wonder whether he might conclude that the Indo-Pacific tilt, as outlined in the integrated review, will need to be reassessed.
Actually, I'm glad that he's brought up the integrated review, because you will see that very early on in the integrated review, we say clearly that the Euro-Atlantic theatre is our #1 issue of concern.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the statement and commend the Prime Minister and his government on its robust approach, but I hope he takes away from this exchange today the strong cross-party support for tougher sanctions now, because that is what is needed. I suggest to the Prime Minister that the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the fact that we've now entered a new era when it comes to the battle for democracy globally, will he now consider a substantial and sustained increase in defence spending, well above the 2.4% that is required to ensure stability and peace in our time? Because Georgia, if indeed there is room for Georgia in the future, will be more effective with stronger armed forces?
I'm grateful, Tim, and my honourable friend, I'm also proud of the very substantial uplift in our defence spending that we've been able to provide, and with the strongest, the fastest growing economy in Europe as a result of the measures that this, in the G7, I should say, as a result of the measures this government has taken. I'm confident that we're going to be able to continue to give our armed forces the investment they need.
Champion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ukraine has been experiencing conflict since 2014, creating a crisis of 2.9 million people in need. Can the Prime Minister please confirm that the UK stands ready to work with the government of the Ukraine and international partners in providing humanitarian assistance should the conflict exacerbate?
Yes, of course.
No problem. John Howell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's statement? I am calling today for the suspension of Russia from the Council of Europe. It cannot be right. It cannot be right for a country to have violated the human rights of another member of the Council of Europe so profoundly. Will he support my actions?
Can I thank my honourable friend for everything he does in the Council of Europe, for the robust positions that he takes in that body, and I wholeheartedly support what he just said.
Malcolm McDonald.
I'm grateful, Mr. Speaker. The Russian disinformation networks, including RT, the Leader of the Opposition, is right in his call on that licence, Mr. Speaker. But those disinformation networks are critical to not just trying to justify Russia's aggression internationally, but maintaining that aggression as well. For how much longer will we continue in this country to pretend that outfits like RT are some kind of benign equivalent to the World Service or France 24? They're not. It's time they went.
Look, Mr. Speaker, I think his point will be widely shared, not perhaps by everybody on the opposition benches, but we have an independent regulator of the media. We don't live in a country where politicians can close down media outlets. It is up to Ofcom to rule.
In Little Granger.
Mr. Speaker, Prime Minister is well aware, and I'm following on my honourable friend just now, that I'm the group leader in the Council of Europe. We have Ukrainians in our group, Prime Minister, who are now under threat. Their families are under threat. They are going to be on the list that the US has now given to their, dare I say, intelligence on what's going to happen to them. Prime Minister, we must stand by these Democrats. They are good people. I've worked with them for now 10 years. I would have nothing but praise for them. Prime Minister, would you not agree that the Council of Europe and other organisations like this need to stand up for democracy and stand up for Democrats?
Yes, I thank him. I thank him for everything he's doing in the Council of Europe, and we should stand by democratic Ukrainian politicians. We all know them. We've all met them. All they want to do is live in peace and freedom, and we should work together to ensure that they can.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many Syrians will know that the continuation of Putin's aggression was not only predictable, it was predicted in this House, on both sides of this House. So does the Prime Minister agree that, as was true in relation to Syria, the only response to aggression is coordinated international resolve, matched by every possible action at home, including each of those, as explained by the Leader of the Opposition?
Mr. Speaker, I think that the lesson from Syria is that you cannot will the end of a regime without being willing to will the means. And that is what this government is prepared to do. And if that is what the Leader of the Opposition is now committing Labour to, then so much the better.
Mark Pritchard.
Speaker, Ukraine is not NATO's border yet. It is not the EU's border yet, but it is democracy's border today. And this House, as you all know, Mr. Speaker, having met the President some months ago here, stands in full solidarity with our counterparts in the Rada and the people of Ukraine, including the people of Donetsk and Luhansk. The Prime Minister mentioned NATO members. Can I ask him what more reassurance and practical support we can give to NATO members like Poland and the Baltic states, who today are just a little bit more fearful.
He's quite right, and he's quite right to draw attention to the Baltic states and Poland. As he knows, in Poland, we've increased our support with another 350 Marines from 4-5 Commando, and in Estonia, we've doubled our presence in Tapa to 2,000. And we will continue to keep and we're doing more in the High North as well as in Romania and elsewhere, and we will continue to keep all these projects under constant review. But we and other European countries are stiffening the eastern frontier of NATO.
Leila Moran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. 5 banks, 3 of Putin's cronies, but 2 of which have already been sanctioned by the US. This isn't us working in concert. This is us already behind. Yeah. I hear what the Prime Minister has said about more sanctions are to come. Can he be clear with us then? What is the trigger?
I think it inevitable that there will be more sanctions to come, because I'm afraid I think it inevitable that Vladimir Putin is going to continue with his flagrant violation of international law. What we're doing today is the first barrage that we're orchestrating in concert with our friends and partners, keeping something in reserve, because there must still be the possibility that we can avert a hideous outbreak of bloodshed in Ukraine.
Peter Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is right to say that Ukraine has been invaded by Russia. I think both sides of the House are expecting stronger sanctions to be announced today, and I think maybe that's what the government wanted to do. But the Prime Minister said he had to move in lockstep with our other allies. Was there resistance from other allies to bring in full sanctions today?
Different countries have different priorities and considerations. It's considerably easier for us to impose economic sanctions. It's difficult for other countries to impose sanctions on to block hydrocarbons. But I'm very pleased by the progress that the German government has made.
Ian Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a day of infamy in Russian history, but the truth is that we're here today because our strategy of deterrence has failed. President Putin has built an arsenal of kleptocracy. He perverts history for his pretexts and he perverts science for his weapons. But the risk is that today's slap on the wrist will not deter anything further. It's been 2014 since we proposed sanctions for economic crimes, apart from the Magnitsky sanctions. The sanctions against the oligarchs have been on the American list since 2018. Missing from the list was VTB, VEB, Alpha, Spearbank. The Prime Minister's got to recognise that pulling our punches does not work with President Putin. We need to punch harder, and if we're not prepared to send bombers, we should at least take on the bankers.
Mr. Speaker, we certainly are taking on the bankers. We're hitting Russia's financial interests, and we will continue to hit them harder.
Michael Fabricant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 85 years ago, a predecessor of the Prime Minister talked about a quarrel in a faraway country between people of whom we know nothing. Doesn't the concordance between both sides of the House today demonstrate that this is not the case when it comes to Ukraine?
My honourable friend is so right, and I think everybody who knows people in the Ukrainian community in Britain, which is so large, so active, makes such a fantastic contribution to our life, feels a huge amount of sympathy for the people of Ukraine today. This is a country that we have familiarity, that we understand. It's a country that is a democracy and that shares our values, and that's what's at stake today.
Jim Shannon.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and what he has said today? As we've woken up to disturbing news of Russian aggression, does the Prime Minister not agree that economic sanctions, whilst welcome, will not be enough? And as such, is the Prime Minister prepared to underline the steps that have been taken with NATO allies to assess the situation and stress that membership in NATO is not a prerequisite for us in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland for supporting democracy in whatever way is deemed necessary?
He's quite right that it is up to the people of Ukraine to decide what alliance they aspire to join. And NATO's open door policy should remain absolutely inviolate.
Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I strongly support the approach of the government, and like my right honourable friend for Lichfield said, it is not a faraway country of which we know nothing. Could I just ask my right honourable friend, what assessment have the government made of the impact from the war on energy prices, of oil prices, and the subsequent impact on people at home, and what measures can the government mitigate those factors which are, as we know, the war is likely to increase the cost of living for ordinary folk across the country?
He's quite right that one of the risks of Putin's venture is that there could be a spike in gas prices and oil prices. Mr. Speaker, and the government will do everything we can to mitigate and to help the people of this country, but it's one of the reasons why the whole of Western Europe has got to end their dependence on Russian oil and gas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Prime Minister to place on his record his respect and admiration for the brave men and women, the OSCE monitors, who for 8 years have been on the border with Ukraine, that now face an impossible position, a democratic member state under attack from a fellow member state? And does he know where we'll be? Can he predict by July, when I speak as a member of the OSCE UK delegates on the Parliamentary Assembly, we will be host nation to the big jamboree in Birmingham? 2 of the Russian delegates are on our sanctions list. If not now, he needs to act.
I thank her very much for what she's doing with the OSCE and the MMR operation. I've met members of the OSCE monitoring unit, and I think they're doing an amazing job. Sadly, because of the threat and the duty of care that we have to them now, we've asked them to step back temporarily. Let's hope we're in a better position by July. Let's hope. But at the moment, things are not looking good.
Stephen Crabb.
Mr. Speaker, can I strongly welcome my right honourable friend's very resolute and clear-sighted statement this afternoon? Does he agree with me that one of the things that Putin is looking for at the moment is any hint or sign of division or variance amongst members of the Western Alliance, and therefore it's really important right now to invest that time to go the extra mile to ensure that our allies right across Europe and including America speak with one voice at this time, in the same way that we this afternoon have spoken with one voice from this House?
I thank him very much, and there's been a lot of commentary today about, should we have gone further, gone with the whole package of sanctions unilaterally today. One of the reasons why we wanted to work in lockstep with our friends is just to reinforce that message of unity and resolve in the West.
Stephen Farry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do think it is the majority view in the House that the government should be going further today on the level of sanctions. But can I press him on the issue of refugees? In the event of further Russian aggression in Ukraine, we would likely see a surge. So can the Prime Minister give me an assurance that this will not be purely left to the neighbouring countries in Eastern Europe? This will be a genuine effort right across Europe, including the UK, to provide assistance, including here, and that there is proper contingency planning happening in Whitehall and also consultation with our allies.
I thank you. The best way to avoid a refugee crisis is for President Putin to de-escalate. The best way to get him to de-escalate is for the West to be united. That's why we're implementing the package of sanctions that I've described together with our friends.
John Whittingdale.
My right honourable friend aware that just 8 years ago this month, 100 Ukrainian citizens died under the sniper fire in the Maidan protest against the pro-Russian corrupt administration of Viktor Yanukovych. Does he agree that the courage and willingness of Ukrainians to give their lives in the fight for freedom and democracy for their country demonstrates that any further invasion is bound to lead to horrendous bloodshed on both sides?
He is completely right, and since those demonstrations, 14,000 Ukrainians have died fighting, Mr. Speaker, for their freedom And I believe, and he knows that country well, my friend knows that country well, and they will continue to defend themselves and fight for liberty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The situation is very clearly that whatever else Putin does in the next few days, he's already invaded another sovereign country. That's a simple truth. Now, the Prime Minister has spoken about this being the first round of sanctions, with potentially more to follow. Could we make sure that we're absolutely clear on this, that further round of sanctions is not dependent on Putin going into Western Ukraine and attacking there? It's simply a matter of trying to coordinate with our allies on this, and therefore we can expect that further round of sanctions in the next few days.
I think it's just to be absolutely clear. I know the House wants us to hit Putin with absolutely everything that we have today. I think that what we want to do is to prioritise unity amongst the alliance and amongst our friends, and work in lockstep with them. So there will be more to come.
Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the statement today from my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, because sanctions from countries all around the world will without question hurt Russia. However, with events overnight, Russia appears to feel that this is a price worth paying. So can my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, confirm with increased deployments to Poland, Estonia and Cyprus, we will do whatever, including militarily, if needed, to support NATO and our friends in Ukraine as this crisis develops?
I thank him and thank my friend, and yes, of course we will, because what is at stake here is not just the future of Ukraine, but our principles and our values.
Robbie Perkins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I come back to the question asked by my honourable friend from Sheffield South East, and also the question asked by honourable gentleman from Swindon North, that it does feel rather, whilst the Prime Minister has been absolutely resolute about how wrong President Putin is and the actions that he's taken, that the message that he will be hearing from us is that the incursions that have gone so far have had a proportionate response, and that there will be nothing else coming unless he goes further, and the Prime Minister really speaking about the expectation that it goes further. Shouldn't we instead be saying that further sanctions will be coming unless we get a withdrawal from the invasions that he's already taken? And shouldn't that be the message that he is taking from this House, that he clearly has widespread support for?
Of course, Mr. Speaker, and I want to be clear that the reason we're doing it in this way is because I think that the unity of the West is the priority.
Mr. McCartney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud to represent a vibrant Ukrainian community across Huddersfield and my Colne Valley constituency. And Mr. Speaker, I know as we speak here, they will be deeply fearful for the safety and democratic freedoms of their friends and family back in Ukraine. So will the Prime Minister commit to unleash the toughest possible sanctions on Russia and continue to support militarily our NATO allies in Eastern Europe?
Yes, I can certainly make that commitment, and I know that that has the support of the whole House.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is right when he says democracy is at stake, including our democracy. The Security Committee's Russia report sets out the challenge clearly. So can I ask the Prime Minister specifically, what does he propose to bring forward to ensure that Putin's dirty money isn't filling the pockets of UK political parties?
Well, as she knows, you can't give money to UK political parties if you're a foreign national.
Mike Weld.
Speaker, without the courage and ambition of Franklin Roosevelt's Land-Lease programme, both Britain and the Soviet Union might not have been able to resist Nazi aggression in 1941. Can the Ukrainian people depend on the United Kingdom and our allies in Europe and in North America to provide similar extensive support so they might be able to resist further Russian aggression?
Yes, and in every conversation I've had in the last few weeks and months about Ukraine, we've focused on this issue of supporting the Ukrainian economy. It's one of the reasons why I think Volodymyr Zelensky has been so reluctant to even to accept the idea of the possibility of an invasion, precisely because of the threat to Ukrainian economic stability. We must shore up that country. That's why I announced a further $500 million of support today from the UK government.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I thank the Foreign Office and the member for Braintree for helping me last week when my constituents Alice Wood and Ben Garrett were stuck in Ukraine and needed to get back with their baby son Raphael, and they issued emergency travel documents. But following on from that, could I ask the Prime Minister, has he made an assessment of the safety of British nationals who are stuck in Ukraine, and will he be relaxing immigration rules and expediting visa applications to make sure that they can return home safely if they wish to do so?
I thank her. I'm glad that the FCDO was able to help out. We've got a dedicated helpline for family members, anybody who's concerned. I think there are about 1,100 currently still in Ukraine. There is a helpline that people should ring if they need. I'll read it out, Mr. Speaker. 01908 51666. There you go.
Alan Cairns.
Mr. Speaker, can I pay tribute to the Prime Minister for the robust steps that he has taken and for the coordinating role in which he is playing across the Western world? And does he agree that last night's event should be seen in the context of Crimea, Salisbury, cyber attacks, as well as the threats of gas supply restrictions? So can he reassure us that he will continue to play a coordinating role to ensure that the Western world is absolutely as one in its response?
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and we already have a huge range of sanctions against. I think there are 275 Russian individuals, as may want to know, 275 Russian individuals who are already sanctioned, including many of those who were responsible for the Salisbury or linked with the Salisbury poisonings, illegal activity in Chechnya, the poisoning of Alexei Navalny, and other episodes.
Matheson.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Prime Minister's statement, but look, Russia's a mafia state. Putin is the godfather, the capo del tutti capo, and he won't change until his capos and his underbosses force him to change, and they won't do that until we pull the financial rug from under their feet, and we're in a unique position to do it. So if he's not willing to put sanctions at the forefront right now, further sanctions, will he at least confirm to the House that he's asked all the relevant agencies to make sure we are bang up to date on all Russian assets, not just dirty, so that we can put those sanctions on as soon as he decides?
Yes, we are, and we're in a position to impose a very considerable economic cost on Putin. The question is whether he's going to care enough about it, because he's plainly in an illogical and irrational frame of mind.
Nicky Aitken.
Thank you, Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement and his leadership and this government's leadership on defending democracy and freedom and standing by our Ukrainian allies, showing what global Britain is all about. Sadly, my constituency is home to too much Russian dirty money, and I welcome the further sanctions. But as the children of Ukraine are set to suffer and fear from war, can I ask my right honourable friend, will he consider that those children of those Russians connected to the Kremlin, who may be in schools in this country, should be perhaps sent home to Russia and not be allowed to benefit from the education within this country?
Mr. Speaker, I thank her very much, and I know that she shares my concern about beneficial ownership of properties in London, which we will now be exposing, and I'm grateful to her support for that. I think when it comes to children, Mr. Speaker, maybe I think I'm not quite there. I think the sins of the fathers, or indeed the mothers, should not be visited on their children, in my view.
Mr. Speaker, there's increasing nervousness about the risk of cyber attacks from hostile states, particularly on our vital public services. Will the Prime Minister outline any additional protections that the government is going to do to ensure that they don't fall victim to Russian aggression?
I think she's completely right, and I think one of the things that the House will have to consider in the weeks ahead, as we continue to lead the world in our support for Ukraine, is the the blowback for this country, and we must be absolutely frank about that. And there will be cyber attacks, and we must understand that and be prepared for that. And that's why we're investing massively in cyber preparedness, another 2.6 billion to help fortify our defences. But as the House knows, there are many, many vulnerable parts of our system, and we must protect them.
Well, Faye Jones.
Speaker, and I commend the Prime Minister for his statement. There are significant numbers of UK Armed Forces personnel in Estonia as part of Operation Kabrit, and I know everyone in this House is enormously grateful to them for their work. I am reassured we have already increased our forward presence there, but can my right honourable friend confirm that he will continue to give the armed forces all the resource that they might need over the coming weeks and months?
Yes. Yes, we certainly will. And it was very good to talk to the Prime Minister of Estonia, Prime Minister Kallas, the other day about the Operation Kabrit and the UK troops at Tapa. She warmly welcomes them. She warmly welcomed the increase, and she says that, by the way, Mr. Speaker, they're impeccably behaved, or they are now anyway.
Final question, Martin Docherty Hughes.
I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker. 3 weeks ago, the Prime Minister said sanctions will come down like a steel trap in the event of the first Russian toe cap crossing into more sovereign Ukrainian territory. So I wonder if you will answer me and the First Minister of Scotland, who believe it would appear that they won't. And if this is the first tranche, there needs to be further tranches with much tougher action soon.
I'm grateful to him for reciting accurately what I said, because that is what we are doing. We are sanctioning them now very heavily for what they're doing in Donbass, so areas where I'm afraid Russian activity has long been, where Russian activity has long been present. And together with our friends and partners, we are going to bring forward further measures that will, I think, hit the Russian economy very hard. But I think what the House, I understand the desire of the House to do everything on day one. But I think that what we should also do is make sure that we work in unison with our friends and partners, because what Putin wants above all is to try to divide us, and in that he must not succeed.
Point of order. Point of order, Chris Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hope the Prime Minister could just stay for a brief moment. It relates to what he said about Roman Abramovich. I don't think that's a courtesy of the House when the Prime Minister leaves in that way.
Go on, Chris. Go on.
The Prime Minister said that Roman Abramovich has been sanctioned. As I understand it, that is not true. I'm sure the Prime Minister was completely inadvertent. But I just wonder, Mr. Speaker, whether you can either make sure that he does that, or you can make sure that he writes to the House and puts a letter in the Library of the House just to correct the record. These are important moments of fact.
They are. Hear, hear.
As the honourable member quite rightly knows, I am not responsible for the answers that ministers give. But the government front bench has heard his point, and if a correction is necessary, I'm sure it will be forthcoming ASAP. Right. Point of order. Rob Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the 11th of February, the honourable member for Cardiff Central paid a visit to my constituency, and try as I might, Mr. Speaker, I looked for notification and received none. So I wondered if you may be able to give some guidance as to what the appropriate protocol would be for such occasions. It's worth pointing out, Mr. Speaker, that in the last couple of moments I have just received an email from the member for Cardiff Central apologising for the administrative error that took place. But I wonder if members may benefit from reiterating what the proper protocols are.
I think the problem's sorted. For once, it makes my life so much easier. What I want to say is, if honourable members do visit other members' constituencies, please inform them of your visit. Right. We now come to the presentation of the bill. Jerome Mayhew.